The Souls series bosses are infamously known for their insane difficulty and the high skill level required to beat them.
What the hell?
And today it is the time to go through and rank every single game's bosses from best to worst. However, just before we get into this, I would just like to ask that you do hit that subscribe button if you want to see more of these videos. And we are so close to 500 subs and it would really mean the world to me. So without further ado, let's kick things off by talking about Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 was the first, well technically second entry to this incredible franchise that has some of the best bosses in gaming history, despite a few. Every boss, despite the ones previously mentioned, were carefully thought out and masterfully designed to expand the player's skill set and to prepare them for the later challenges. For example, the Asylum Demon teaches you to explore your surroundings, and it will present you with more opportunities along with teaching you the plunge attack. This is followed up in the Taurus Demon fight, as there are these hollow soldiers that shoot you from on top of a turret, and if you look around you, you will find that you can climb up a ladder and kill them.
Nice shot!
And also, ooh, what's this? An opportunity to get a drop on the demon and use the plunge attack. Yeah, I'll be making quite a few of these jokes in this video, so please buckle in. But just before we get to that, I feel that I should explain to you how I'm going to rank these games. Allow me to explain. So the way these games are going to be ranked is based on a few factors. These being the actual quality of the bosses, the lessons that the bosses are built to teach, the enjoyment factor, and the area in which these bosses are fought in. Then they will be ranked on a tier list from God to terrible. Now let's get back to it. Next up on the cherry-picked list of bosses I want to talk about to perfectly illustrate my point so people can't complain in the comment section about the rank I gave it, the Bell Gargoyles. The Gargoyles are a really good progress check to see how much you've learned, as this is a duo fight, after the halfway point in the fight that is. I really love the combination of the rising difficulty curve and the small arena, because for the first half of the fight, you were learning the attacks and how best to use the arena's space. However, in phase 2, all that knowledge gets flipped on its head as they throw in a second gargoyle with a brand new moveset, and they're able to close off space and force you to play up close, because of course that's fair, isn't it? And after this, you get to progress to Blight Town. I don't need to discuss why that's a bad area, because it's been beaten to death at this point, and then you reach Sense Fortress. Again, fantastic area this time, and I don't need to talk about why it's so good, because again, it's been beaten to death. And then you reach Anor Londo, and then Orenstein and Smo, and then it's into the shit show that is the last section of the game. And then at the end of the terrible last section of the game, it's all wrapped up with Gwyn, the Lord of Sindar. Gwyn is the perfect example of exactly what makes this game's bosses so good. He's got a long wind up on his attacks, but they're still fast. He takes advantage of space in the arena. He closes in on you to make it more challenging to break up the fight, but he also can be made really easy if you know how to parries. Anyways, Dark Souls 1 is a prime example of how the fight should be designed, and to make them smooth, fun, and difficult. But due to the clunky nature of the game, it actually makes some of the bosses harder than they need to be, for instance Artorias. So with all this in mind, Dark Souls 1 is going in mid-tier. Speaking of mid-tier, Dark Souls 2. Everything I praised Dark Souls 1 for falls flat on its face in Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 feels like somebody else looked at what Dark Souls 1 was so loved for and then tried to remake it with the free plan of Unity with assets from Temu and slapped it on the Steam store only for people to hate it, and then they remake it and make it even worse, which is essentially what happened. There really isn't much that makes Dark Souls 2 distinct or even good, because most of the bosses are just pretty shit. Although I do really like the Pursuer, as it teases him early in the Forest of Fallen Giants and then allows you to fight him shortly after, and you get to use the environment to kill him easily. I do feel that the bosses do get better later on, but personally I don't feel that that makes it worth the time it takes to get there. But I feel that a boss that shows some of the lost potential this game has literally comes from right at the beginning of the game, and that is the Last Giant. This boss has a big arena and an even bigger appearance and a colossal sense of lost potential. Instead of having this boss be challenging and have some unique attacks, they instead looked at the Iron Giant from DS1 and just went, yeah, let's just make this, and instead of making its attacks unique like the Iron Giant, let's just have it be... So with all this in mind, Dark Souls 2 is going straight and terrible. As with all these rankings, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong, because we all know that you guys love doing that. And now, just like the Dark Souls 1 DLC, let's take a trip back into the past and talk about Demon Souls, because who needs chronological order, am I right? I hate my life. Demon Souls is a game that I didn't actually get to pick up until the PS5 remake, and honestly, that was the only reason I tried to get one. And to be completely honest, I just really wasn't that impressed by the bosses. A lot of them can can be really trivialized just by picking up on hints that aren't really that discreet from NPCs or just the area. They have really noticeable weaknesses that can make every boss, no matter what order you do them in, really easy, and I just don't think that it was worth the 60 quid that I paid for it. And this is shown very early on with the Vanguard Demon, because you enter this room with a really big boss that punches like a truck, and oh, what's that? Oh, you can just hide behind him and it's fine. Right. Great game, guys. Very difficult. 10 stars on Yelp. But Demon's Souls is still a very good game, and the bosses are so visually impressive and actually quite unique, and I really do honestly respect that. Demon's Souls, as it stands in the remake, is fantastic for showing what the game's passed on to its predecessors. As it stands on its own, Demon's Souls is just going to go into A tier and it can just kind of stay in there. Moving on swiftly, which is actually an accurate description of this next title's boss fights. Like what I did there. Dark Souls 3, my very first Souls experience, and still 7 years later stands as one of the best games in the entire franchise, and one reason for that is its bosses. DS3 was a massive change up for the Souls series, as now it was fast and aggressive as opposed to slow and passive. You no longer wait for opportunities to strike, but instead make them. This very simple change caused massive ripples across the attitude Souls players had towards how to play these games, and one of the places this shone through was the boss fights. And the boss fights, well, speak for themselves. To keep with the style of the bosses I mentioned for the other games, I will speak about Dark Souls 3's first and probably most famous boss, Edic's Gundyr. Gundyr was a real wake-up call to anybody who plays this game, because although the Cemetery of Ash has been a really easy area, Gundyr is here to slap you in the face with that classic Dark Souls difficulty, and my god, does he do a good job at it. He's not only challenging, but he also is a sample that the rest of the game follows up. And this is something I've actually spoken about in my last ranking of the Souls series, so I won't talk about it too much here, so if you want to hear about that, go check out the video. But let's move on to the next boss I'm going to talk about, Pontiff Summon. The Pontiff is a masterclass in what makes the Souls bosses so different to every other action game that is out there. This is because he combines well-telegraphed attacks with an easily followable rhythm that takes skill to take advantage of. Every time I play this boss, I can't help but just roll and roll and roll endlessly because of how good the rhythm of the fight feels, and it does feel so good. Then of course you have the classic DLC bosses like Frida and Slave Knight Gale, which are insanely good bosses, especially Gale, which is what some people call a segue. Gale is one of the strongest contenders for the best boss in the entire franchise. He combines the biggest arena in the entire game, if not the entire franchise, with attacks that are quick and hit like a truck to counter the amount of health that the player has, while still providing opportunities to heal, but you really do have to fight for them. And his attacks are some of the most unique the series has ever seen, while still being a reminder of Artorias, but with a major step up in quality. And then after all of the hours spent adventuring through Lothar, the trilogy is tied up with a beautiful callback to the most well-known boss in gaming history, Gwyn. The Soul of Cinder is a fresh and unique, but still chock full of nostalgia, and that is an incredibly beautiful example of why this game deserves to be in God tier. So it's going in God tier. Now let's see what's next. Oh yes, how could I forget? It's Elden Ring time, baby! Woo! I can't keep making this joke. I'm sure none of us need an introduction to this one, but Elden Ring has spun into an internet sensation and has created memes that have reached a wider audience than it was intended to. But unfortunately, I'm gonna be a little rat and deal some hefty damage here, because I think Elden Ring is a bit overrated in the boss department because of this one very simple reason. There are too many of them. Yes, you heard me right. I personally think that the bosses fall a bit flat in this game because of the fact that there are too many of them. Because in other games, it's always had a sense of, oh my god, yes, another boss! Woo! Again, I cannot keep making this joke. But in Elden Ring, it's more like,
you're joking. Not another one?
the bosses themselves are really good most of the time, hashtag Radan/Neg on Twitter please. But they do become really easy when traveling back to dungeons you missed, or even entire areas because of the lack of scaling, and some bosses feel really lazy and don't get me wrong, there are some incredible fights in this game, but there are also a fair share of really bad ones. Looking at you, Foreskin Duo. And most of the time, the bosses become really dry. For instance, the Dragon Lord, and not even going to try to pronounce that last name, in Far Missoula. By the time you get to him, it's like, oh my god, he's awesome! Oh, it's literally just a bigger version of the dragons in this area anyway. Or even the Fire Giant. I'm gonna be honest, the number of really bad fights in this game just can't outweigh the good ones. And for that, Elden Ring's gonna have to go in C tier. And just just before I get burned at the stake, I would like to say that this is all just my opinion, and of course feel free to tell me why you disagree with my rankings, and hey, maybe even make your own ranks too. But now it's time for my favorite time in all of these videos. It's Bloodborne time, let's go! Again, please stop me, I am criminal. I feel like at this point it's no surprise that I love Bloodborne, and one of the biggest reasons for that is because of how good the bosses are, and my god, they're fantastic! There is not a single boss in this game that feels like a step down in quality, or even just whacked in there for the sake of having a boss in an area. Every single one is beautifully well designed and masterfully realized. Bloodborne's bosses are a masterclass on how to make your bosses and enemy fit the atmosphere that you have created. Every boss is weird and unique, even when they are just humans, which brings me on to my first point. Father Gascoigne is the first non-optional boss in the game, and my god is he a fantastic one. He is unresting, relentless, and my god is he genius. I don't know what From Software's smoking when they came up with him, but good Jesus, I need some of that. Because in phase 1 he's fast and punishes you for trying to back away to catch your breath, because in Bloodborne you can't afford to do that because of how fast and player-led the combat is. I know I keep rattling on about this, but Bloodborne is the first game in the series where you have to force your opportunities to attack, because otherwise you're going to die. A lot. Every single boss will punish you to death for taking it slow, so a mastery of the basics is non-negotiable. Otherwise, you will not be able to get past Gascoigne, or hell, even the cleric beast. Anyways, back to Gascoigne. He goes from human to human with bigger axe in phase 2, to a whole tea-spilling abomination that is the beast he transforms into in phase 3. Everything about this fight is a stroke of genius, and this carries through the entire experience. Even Mikolash, who is unarguably the worst boss in the entire game, he is so unique, but it still makes sense. And even though one of his attacks, a call from beyond, does get a bit out of hand sometimes, it can be manageable when you learn how to avoid it, because you can just stun him out of using it if you stick to being relentlessly aggressive. And then to follow that up with Mergo's wet nurse, who is the incarnation of everything unsettling and weird that Bloodborne takes in its stride, and she is incredibly challenging. In fact, when I was recording the footage for my Bloodborne video, link in the description, I had to go off and level like 2 times because she kept curb stomping me, and my god was she good at that! And then to have one of the final bosses in the game be the man that guided you through the entirety of it, Gehrman, was beyond baffling to me. And my god, is his fight beyond describable. I mean, just look at this. And of course, how could I not talk about this game's bosses without mentioning the highlight of this beautifully crafted experience, the Old Hunters DLC. There are only 4 bosses in the DLC, but every single one of them is incredible, besides the living failures, because well, yeah, you can see what I mean by that one. But it all kicks off with Ludwig the Accursed, a character in the story only mentioned by name by some NPCs and a few West. He is a beautiful representation of what this game is at its core, a masterfully constructed mix between Lovecraftian horror and Bloodborne's gothic atmosphere. And the fight itself is just so captivating and will permanently alter the way you judge these games' bosses. And then the music, well, just even the music alone is just so, I can't even describe how good it is. It was a beautiful way to kick off the DLC, but if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, then go check out my video on why I think Bloodborne is a timeless masterpiece. The link will be in the description. And so that closes out the rankings. So I'm gonna put Bloodborne in S tier, baby. Woo! Please genuinely stop, I need more jokes. So that was the ranking. If you did enjoy this video, then please feel free to hit that like button. And also tell me what you thought about my rankings in the comments. And hey, if you like this video, then go check out my rankings of which Souls game is the best for beginners, which is linked in the description below and on the end screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.